put an end to Jeremy Corbyn's fake claims and clarify any doubts about our social care policy and the family home.
The media coverage, which is about power and the relationship between power and media.
Why didn't the BBC report it? Why didn't the Guardian report it, or the Herald, or why didn't anybody report it?
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox and 4
The headline finding was an imbalance, a tendency for the coverage to report more on bad news for independence, worries about the economy, about NATO, about
the attack on the Twin Towers. That was well before the Iraq war. So there's no correlation here between foreign policy and this appalling act of terrorism.
There was a tendency for them to be, those stories to be reported more than positive comments, which were often defensive comments made by SNP politicians. And so what it showed was actually quite a subtle imbalance, not really that dramatic. But what was more important, I thought, was sequence.
Implies that somehow this attack can be explained away on the basis of previous foreign interventions by successive governments, and that's wrong.
I don't know which draft you've read, but I mean the bit I've got is that he says the blame is with the terrorists.
On the economy.
Well, he would say that.
So that negative news about Scotland's future after independence came first, and commonly a defensive comment came second. And the defensive comment is always weakened by coming second.
Scotland, according to the IFS report today, and they're independent
If bad news about the economy has been shown to be effective. What's more, I think, more effective is the subtle repetition. The repetition of bad news about the economy at more than one point in the programme. In the headline, in the main text, then at the end, and then repeated again several times throughout the day. I think that subtle repetition of negative information, especially if it's about the economy, must have some kind of effect. Difficult to prove, and its subtlety, of course, is one of the reasons that it continues, that people are not always aware of it.
The Office for Budget Responsibility, the government's official independent forecaster.
This is the crucial journalistic choice, is what sources do you use. There is a tendency increasingly to rely on establishment sources.
Look, this is an independent report. The IFS is a very respected institution.
According to a leading think tank, a study for the Institute for Fiscal Studies.
And there was a tendency to take reports from the Treasury, from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, from the Office for Budget Responsibility as if they were impartial. All three of these bodies are politicised, and there were far more of those negative official sources than positive ones, and people from think tanks.
Once North Sea tax revenues start to dwindle and the additional costs of things like long-term care funding come into play,
these people are
Paul Johnson, who is the director of the independent think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Now, so far so good.
£80,000 a year for an...
He wasn't introduced. They didn't say who he was in these independent expert checks. He just appeared looking expert. But I thought, well, let's find out who he is and who he represents. And he represents a think tank, as I say, which is the Institute for Fiscal Studies. So I've done a couple of searches on the Institute for Fiscal Studies.
Represented as if their intelligence makes them somehow above the dirt of the debate, that somehow they can be trusted. It's not true. We're all the same. Politicians, professors, chairmen of think tanks are all ideologically positioned. They're all coming from somewhere. But a lot of the experts on television will be presented as if they're not coming from somewhere, as if they're somehow parachuted straight in from a pure space where their argument is entirely reasonable. That's never the case. You can't trust anybody.
damaging headlines for the First Minister.
There was a tendency to constantly refer to Yes campaign ideas as being the ideas of just Alex Salmond. And I saw that as a process of demonising.
Lots of people think the SNP leader Alex Salmond has a pretty big head.
Generally what happens in a campaign is you'll have the candidate will carry the positive messages, talk about what they want to achieve and so forth, and then the campaign itself, maybe the literature that's put out or in what they call in the United States surrogates. In the US, Obama had lots of surrogates who were attacking Mitt Romney all the time about his wealth and decisions he'd made in the past. They should carry the sort of the more negative messages. Tone is very important when you're executing. You shouldn't be executing anybody. When you're executing a negative campaign, and certainly candidates should overwhelmingly only ever communicate a positive narrative.
Fashionable towards the end of the campaign for people to report, oh, there's been this surge in the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, and that's upsetting the dynamic for Labour. The first time we picked that up was in November of 2014, when in discussions in focus groups people said Ed Miliband's a very weak man. If the SNP do really well and he relies on them to govern, they will push him around. Who knows what we would get? And that was from the mouth of voters well before anybody had picked up this sense. So we started building on that then. It wasn't something that came late in the campaign. It came late in a lot of people's realisation, perhaps.
We'll characterise opposition leaders as foolish in some way. They'll find a way to personalise the general argument and make it the argument of a single person, and thus undermine it.
Determined to take away.
Jeremy Corbyn has said that terror attacks in Britain are our own fault.
The business of media effects is often coloured by people thinking about the Soviet Union, where propaganda was monolithic, where the state view was hammered into the audience. Now, it was totally ineffective. Heavy propaganda is worse than no propaganda at all. Now, people in establishment positions.
When you're running a campaign, you have a particular objective, and that is, to get your side over the line, to help them win in the right way, not breaking the law, consistent with your values and all of those things. And there are really four elements to political issues that I look at political issues and to satisfy four tests to work out whether they're relevant for us in a campaign context. The first is an issue generally salient? That is it out there and sort of makes sense to people that you're talking about it? Secondly, is it personally relevant? If it's not generally salient and you start talking about it, people think, what on earth is, where's he or she coming from? What are they talking about? There's no connection whatsoever. So it needs to be that general salience, but then you need to have personal relevance. People need to see how it relates to them and their lives, or relates to something that's important to them. They're the first two tests. The third test is it's got to be capable of being politically differentiated. If you can't, you've got to set yourself apart from your opponent. Otherwise, why would people, if they voted for them last time and you're offering the same, there's no political differentiation. Why would they change to you? So there's got to be political differentiation. And then finally, the issues that you pursue have to be capable of point of sale execution. What I mean by that is they have to relate to how people behave in a polling place. And people have to know the connection. They have to know, oh, right, I'm going in to vote. When I vote, I'm doing this because this is the consequence of me doing this, which is a positive consequence in some way. To produce a leaflet, whatever it is, with the limited resources you have, you need to ensure that they are focused on where they will yield most return. So you start by locking in your base, you then move to the swing group and focus your resources on, that's a core vote strategy. Well, if you focus just on your base, you're never going to win. It comes down finally to Labour and the Liberal Party, the Conservatives and the Socialists, basically. But the principle remains. You need to know who is your base, who is your swing and who is your anti. and sometimes this is attributed to me in the UK media, but it didn't come from me, it came from John Howard, who was Prime Minister of Australia. The statement, you can't fatten a pig on market day.
What Linton will tell you is that he can't fatten a pig on market days.
So it's very important that you understand you can't fatten the pig on market day, you've got to do as much as possible in advance.
As MPs flee Westminster for their summer holidays, one man will be left behind poring over polls and that infamous news grid. He's Linton Crosby, and he's the advisor paid to propel David Cameron back into number 10 in 2015. Like Labour's Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell, he's widely seen as the Tory party's sinister eminence who even controls who's up and who's down in the cabinet. So has he become too powerful? Allegra Stratton has been finding out.
You always play to win, you don't play to come second. Smirk is attitude. Smirk is, here's a person who says he can get away with this. Well, I'm no genius, I'm just an ordinary person who wanted to help the Conservative Party.
One of their number is head of their general election campaign, Linton Crosby. To many people, he's the most powerful person in the Tory party.
Thrusting immigration into the campaign glare has been attributed to Australian election strategist Linton Crosby.
But it also got pretty nasty.
The Indonesian ferry carrying the asylum seekers was intercepted by the Australian Navy. At the time, the Prime Minister, John Howard, said those on board threw children into the sea to try to force the Navy to pick them up.
Yes, he did run campaigns for John Howard that were largely or significantly fear-based. They were trying to worry people about the fact that there was this...
Not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Stag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew.
And his defence minister, who actually said those.
And he went hard on immigration again.
The theory is that you somehow put out these messages that people can't generally hear, but the people who need to hear them pick them up and respond and vote your way. So they're not issues that you talk about in the broad.
Yeah.
But hey, everyone knew that Michael Howard and the Conservatives were focusing on immigration and crime and all of these things. No one could say that they were trying to secretly, below the line, through phone calls or direct mail letters, address an issue that they were trying to hide from the rest of the voters.
Linton Crosby is fond of the sayings of this man, General Slim, whose statue is not far away from Downing Street. Slim said, in battle, things are rarely as good or as bad as the first reports of excited men would have them. I can tell you firsthand that Linton Crosby detests the breathless ups and downs of Westminster gossip. Instead, he gets his politicians to focus on 3 or 4 core messages and rams them home over months and months, and preferably years and years. Sources of mine who have dared to deviate from those messages know about it. They get rung up for the Linton Crosby hairdryer treatment. The energetic Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, is always trying to announce new ideas on health, but he's stopped by the iron grip of Crosby. But the biggest barnacle of all, Michael Gove. Crosby showed the Prime Minister polling indicating the Education Secretary is so unpopular it could have been an electoral barnacle. The PM moved Gove, and the Chancellor remonstrated but lost, indicating Crosby trumps the Chancellor right now. Linton Crosby's word is the law. Economic competence, immigration, welfare reform, Crosby's messages next year, but too heavy on immigration and ethnic minority voters will be frightened off the Tories. Too harsh on welfare won't help them with the north of Britain.
Big society and one nation, well, and differentiation. Well, the risk, firstly, if anyone can, in 10 words or less, explain to me what one nation is, be interested to know. Two, because I don't think the average punter, like those of us in politics, will have a view about what one nation anything is, but average punters, you know, they don't talk about, walk down there and talk to the guy waiting at the bus stop. What do you think about a one nation political party? They'd say, what on earth are you talking about? There are things like trust, likability, honesty, competence, being in touch, strength. Now sometimes, and strength can be sort of compassionate and, you know, sort of a strength in terms of a quiet determination or an ability to relate. That could be a strength in one political landscape. In another, it could be, you know, real the sort of traditional strength, like tough and so forth. For example, if you're faced with very, you know, think of Churchill in the war, you would, you know, you wouldn't have said he was, you know, he was, you know, they describe, you know, the bulldog, the tough, determined, stubborn, all of those qualities. Now, in a lot of climates, being a stubborn, very focused, completely driven to your agenda and nobody else's could be a negative. But in the war, it was a resolute determination that helped the country get through. So at different times, different qualities can be important. If the economy's going very well, you know, things are on track and the economy's going very well, a sort of more in touch, compassionate style of candidate could well be what people want. When the economy's very difficult and you're in debt, people know that you might have to make some difficult decisions. The sort of person you want to make those different comes with all the staff and shareholders and sing Kumbaya and make them all feel good about themselves. I might just want somebody who can come in and cut costs, very arrogant, very tough, all of those things. It was at a different stage, and so you didn't want tough, arrogant, not listen to anybody else, just absolutely determined to get to an end.
I'm not going to be calling a snap election, where we agreed that the government should call a general election to be held on the 8th of June of the next Parliament. As I've just said, you'll have to wait for the manifesto to see what's in it. I'm elected.
They have had a 14% pay cut since 2010, and we now get stories again from the RCN of lots of ordinary nurses by the end of the week having to use food banks. Nurses going to food banks at the moment. That must be wrong.
We have, and there are many complex reasons why people go to food banks, and I want to develop an economy.
To eat at the moment.
But if you're only going to, as we go through this election, every party will be talking about what they think is important. I'll be talking about
strong and stable leadership.
Well, I'll be talking, and there's a reason for talking about strong and stable leadership.
That kind of thing, and think it's a bit robotic.
No, when I talk about leadership, when I talk about the strength of the government for the future, I do it for a reason, and the reason is this.
Linton Crosby's word is the law. Economic competence, immigration, welfare reform, Crosby's messages next year, but
I want to put an end to Jeremy Corbyn's fake claims and clarify any doubts about our social care policy and the family home.